Technology Symposium 2021, sponsored by the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, the Alabama School for the Blind Alumni and Workers Association, and the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind. CEU Open Code 90019. Our presentation will begin shortly. CEU Open Code 90019. Our presentation will begin shortly. CEU Open Code 90019. And now, Mr. Jack Harrison.
It is my pleasure to introduce the presenters for this session titled Teaching at a School for the Blind During the COVID Pandemic. Speaking today are Mr. Dan Kelly and Ms. Marie McCumber. Mr. Kelly is a teacher of the visually impaired and an assistive technology specialist at the Ohio State School for the Blind for 24 years. Dan is an adaptive technology trainer and specialist for the state of Ohio and the I Can Connect program. He has many years of being a guest lecturer at the Ohio State University and Shawnee State University. Dan loves a challenge and has a passion to help empower people to meet life challenges with correct tools, to encourage critical thinking and problem-solving skills. He is the proud father of 2 boys, and his hobbies and interests include outdoor activities like biking, camping, fishing, and taking his new puppy for long walks. Other interests include audio engineering, podcasting, and reading and listening to books. Ms. Marie McCumber is an elementary teacher at the Ohio State School for the Blind, currently teaching 5th grade. This is her 11th year as an educator. She graduated from Ashland University in 2006 with her Bachelor's of Science in Early Childhood Intervention. In 2018, she completed the licensure program at the Ohio State University to become a teacher of students with visual impairments. She has grown up with a love of technology and has utilized this in her teaching career. Being a natural problem solver, Marie loves to take on a challenge and to help others get through theirs as well. Her favorite phrases include, "I have an idea, and let's do it." Outside of education, Marie enjoys being outdoors, camping, fishing, hiking, bike riding, and gardening. She also enjoys cooking, baking, and canning. She can often be found reading and writing, and she lives in Columbus, Ohio. Again, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dan Kelly and Ms. Marie McCumber. Thank you for attending.
Hello everyone in Alabama. It is great to be back at the Alabama Technology Symposium. My name is Dan and this is
Marie McCumber.
Closer to your mic. All right, this is Marie McCumber and we are both teachers at the Ohio State School for the Blind. And the title of our presentation today is Teaching Students with Visual Impairments During COVID. Very original, isn't it? But what is original is I wrote this little jingle myself.
Right, you're a music producer.
Right. So we'll go ahead and stop it. And we'll get on with the presentation. Thank you so much. We are both glad to be here today. And we will get on with the presentation.
Press the arrow keys.
All right. My name is Dan Kelly. And I'm a TVI at the Ohio State School for the Blind, and I also do technology consulting work for the I Can Connect program, which is the deaf-blind communications equipment distribution and training program. It's a federal program. I'm also a guest lecturer at the Ohio State University and Shawnee State University as well. And I also do AT work consulting for our rehab services up here in Ohio at the Ohio State School for the Blind in Ohio. I am the technology integration specialist. Now, I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I'm kind of the lead guy for staff professional development with technology, in house training for technology, app and device deployment with our current iPads and things like that, teaching students and providing ongoing support for teachers, students, other staff, and their family. Now, before we get started, I just want to say I love coming back and presenting in Alabama, even though this year is virtual because I grew up here. I have a lot of friends here, and I just love coming back, even though if it's virtual. Today, I'm going to talk about what we did at the School for the Blind during COVID. I'm going to focus on the tools that we used for learning, the planning that we did, and I'm even going to talk about the mistakes that we made in that process. Okay, so we're going to go back a little bit. Prior to COVID, we were planning for months to change our technology platform. We were primarily a Windows based environment. We used JAWS, we used Zoom Text, we used Fusion, we used Office 365, and all that other Windows stuff. That was working pretty well, but we were constantly doing maintenance on our Windows machines. We had hard drives that were going bad. We had drivers for hardware that weren't working like they should. We had network issues, so on. It was also expensive to maintain the license for all that assistive technology software every year on a school-wide basis. So our senior leadership team, which is like our superintendent and assistant superintendent and principal and administrators and all that top heavy stuff, they kind of wanted to change the focus to Apple. So they got our technology team together and a couple of teachers from the blind school and the deaf school. And we decided that we were going to go with Apple because Apple offers universal design with accessibility built in from the ground up. And that is up to a certain point, which I'll return to later. So it ended up that our universal learning vehicle for all of our students would be the iPad because you can hook a braille display to it. You can connect a keyboard to work on typing skills. If you're low vision, you can connect it to a huge monitor if you need to. And the environment of an iPad really isn't all that challenging once you get used to it. Our teachers during this initiative, they would get a MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air, and they would also get an iPad. Our parapros and our youth leaders, which are residential, our dorm folks, residential advisors, they would also get iPads. One of the main ideas with switching over to this technology is the ease of sharing information between people and devices. If my student has a presentation or a paper, he can do a lot of things using an Apple device. He can airdrop it to me. He can connect to my Apple TV and share it with the class. He or she can also share it with the Google Classroom or the Apple Classroom as well. So, with all this in mind, we planned on doing this process very slowly at this tech transition, but it didn't work out that way just because of the timeline when the stuff came in like December and we were getting it all set up. And then all of a sudden in March, we got the word to prepare for our kids to be at home and our staff to be at home for at least 2 weeks. We were told to make up some packets to keep them busy. Oops, not keep them busy. I meant to promote learning. And that eventually changed to, hey, we're going to be home for quite a while. So we assumed in our planning process that this was going to happen, that we were all going to be staying at home for quite some time because the words like telework started coming up quite a lot. And I was thinking, do teachers have the ability to telework? And the rest of my team were thinking the same thing. And do our students have the ability to telelearn? Is that a word? I don't know. But most of our teachers did, and some did not. So the week before that we finally decided that we were going to go home, we started that rollout process of the Apple technology. Teachers got their devices in person. We made sure that they were able to sign in, log into their devices, and that we made sure that their email was connected and the apps that they would need were on the devices. Now, students, on the other hand, they were already at home by this time. Teachers had to come in an extra day to pick up their devices. Students were mailed their iPads and Braille displays. I purchased Chameleon Braille displays from American Printing House for the Blind for all of my Braille users, most of them anyway. I sent them out to the students that I knew that could read enough Braille so they could set up both devices and get them paired and work together. I soon realized that the importance of old school technology was very important. And I mean the telephone, because when we started this process at home, getting students connected, it was very, very tough. I was thinking this was supposed to work easily. It was supposed to be seamless, but it did not go as seamless as what we thought it would go. For instance, one of the things that happened that, someone in our IT department thought that all the iPads sent home for all the students at the School for the Blind in Ohio needed to have VoiceOver turned on. Now, anybody that knows how VoiceOver works, it totally changes the way that you interact with an iOS device. So my iPhone users, who were blind, they were fine, but everybody else was kind of in a quagmire about getting their iPad unlocked and getting it connected to their Wi-Fi and all that. So I spent about 10 hours a day on the phone with families and just trying to get everybody set up and connected to their Wi-Fi. And then I discovered that some people didn't have internet access. We do have some rural folks up here in Ohio. We have some folks that maybe don't have a family internet plan. So we had to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we need to get some hotspots from Verizon and send out to these folks so they have internet access so they can access their curriculum. So this goes on till about mid-April, and about that time we're stumbling along. We're probably firing on about half of our cylinders at best. And I really don't mind saying that because everyone was doing that by this point. I do feel good that at that point, most of our kids were connected and they could get on Zoom or Google Meets or whatever they were using with their teachers. Officially, we use Zoom for class meetings, and we used Google Classroom to deliver content and for students to turn content back into their teachers. For me, those two options made sense from an accessibility standpoint. I had some teachers, though, that did not agree.
He's hitting me.
I am poking Marie beside me. So officially, I said, you know what, we're going to use Zoom and Google Classroom. But unofficially, I said, guys, you're going to do what works. If you have to get your class on a conference call on the phone, that's something that you got to do. You got to connect with your students. If you need to use Google Meets, because Google Meets will put the link right there in the class for the student and they can see it. They click on it and they're fine. They don't have to go hunting for it. Some teachers even use the Remind app to send information out to their students about what they need to be doing and when and that kind of things. Now, another big problem that we had is that when students signed up for their classes in Google Classroom, even though we sent home notes that said, use your school account, email account, it's compatible with Google, there was a mix of school email accounts, personal Gmail accounts, and some students just couldn't even get signed on at all. So that led to a lot of confusion later. And when you're thinking about Google and you're using your personal account, with Google, the default account loads first. when you access Google services. So whatever account you log on to first when you go to gmail.com pretty much is going to be your default account. So it was a lot of work on the back end getting people signed out of everything and back into their school accounts. But it finally happened. Now, I'm going to talk about teaching virtually a little bit. Marie, you may want to unplug your laptop so you can, do some touring of the computer lab.
Oh,
I'm not going to tell you a lie about virtual teaching. It was a real struggle for me, and it was a real struggle for a lot of people. One thing I noticed right off the bat was that if a student was using an iPad, and even if they share their screen and they share the sound of their iPad, you're not going to hear voiceover in the video conference call. Isn't that something? Apple built that very well, but it didn't work out very well for a teacher when you're saying, all right, what is it? What is it saying? So all day long, you're like, swipe left, swipe right, and tell me what it says. Okay, spin the rotor. Tell me what, we're looking for headings now because we're on a website and we need to find that. So, I was teaching kids kindergarten through 12th grade and working with their families. And I was really having a tough time. I was working in my basement 10, 12 hours a day. And it just felt like it was very defeating to me most of the time because I felt that I wasn't delivering quality instruction or quality and support for these people. But we started figuring things out, and Miss McCumber's going to show you some of the things that we're using. Um, I'm not going to show you any of the videos that I did at this point, but I did a lot of how-to videos about how things would look and sound when you're trying to complete a task. Like, how do I find my class in Google Classroom? How do I sign into Google Classroom? Once I'm signed in, I do an assignment. How do I turn it in? How do I make that happen? So what I had to do was buy some different stands and things like that and use some different devices to capture the iPhone screen, capture the iPhone sound. And that worked a lot better. I was sending out links from Google, like, this is how you do these things. This is how you do these things. But nobody has time to look at those things and read through those things. And a lot of families were feeling very overwhelmed, including my own family during that time. So the videos were really helpful to a lot of families and a lot of people. And it really helped me as a teacher to help me focus the things that I was trying to do. Now, I got an audio mixer, audio interface or a mixer, and you want to show them the mixer?
I am.
Okay,
Yeah,
showing the mixer.
I am.
So what I ended up doing with this mixer, I actually use it for my podcast that I do for the School for the Blind, but I got a portable audio mixer for at home, is that I could connect every device that my students were using if they were using. So if I was using, if I was in a class and students had iPads, Braille notes, and a Polaris, I'd connect all those devices up at my house to this mixer. I'd run the mixer back through the computer, and then I could do whatever the task was on any of those devices. So at least the kids could hear what was supposed to happen when they did the same thing. Like, this is what you're listening for. When you're in Google Classroom, you're looking for that menu at the top, and that's what you want to double tap on. Or if you're using a Braille display, you want to do a 3/6 space or use the cursor routing button or whatever. And then we're going to go through that, and this is what you're going to hear. So it really worked well for screen reader users, or users that were using the note taker. And for students that were low vision, I was able to share my screen, and they could, see it visually what was happening. So we limped along and we got through the spring and we get to the summer. And over the summer, we learned a lot of things. We learned how to manage iPads better through JMF School and Apple School Manager. So, I learned how to send a Zoom link straight to an iPad's home screen, which was huge because when we came back in the fall, we were hybrid. All right. So we still had some kids that were virtual when we came back in October and later in January. So the main thing with that is if you got, students who are visually impaired that have multiple disabilities, they can get the concept of swiping left and right and double tapping on things if they're using voiceover. But man, if you say, all right, I want you to open up this email and I want you to find this message and go into this message and I want you to click on the Zoom link, that might be a little overwhelming for that student. So being able to send the teacher's Zoom link straight to their home screen was very helpful for them. So the iPad, I think, has turned out to be pretty flexible and easy to work with in both the in person and virtual environment. It's a lot easier in person. But as a technology administrator or manager, I can do just about anything with the iPad except for remote in and control the device live, like you can do with JAWS Tandem and Windows PCs, or if you're doing direct connect through iMessage on the iMac. Okay, so we did a lot of that with teachers and stuff. It was a learning process for everyone. We learned to celebrate our successes. I mean, when those happened, and we also celebrated our failures too. You know, we learn from both and we grow from both. But the outcome of this pandemic, as far as I'm concerned, is that things feel a lot more organized than they were. All right. Kids are now using online resources all the time, whether they're in person or they're virtual, and they didn't have to do that before. And online skills, obviously, they're going to lead to success in college or when they go to work after they get out of high school. There's a lot of kids that now are empowered based on their experience and their learning because they had to be problem solvers and they had to do more on their own. Some of our families at the School for the Blind are more connected than they ever were before. And then there are those families that are extremely frustrated too. And that's everywhere. You know, we're going to get that. But I think we all were forced to grow a great deal over the last year. And now I've talked long enough. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss McCumber.
Yes, my name is once again Marie McCumber. I am a TVI and an elementary teacher at the Ohio State School for the Blind. I am a Tinker and Google certified educator. I am also a Teach Better Team ambassador and a newly appointed Ohio Teacher of the Year nominee. Um, I am going to talk about how I taught my virtual classroom and how I will continue to teach a technology immersive classroom in the future. So, as a teacher, we want to look at best practice. And best practice states that for children with visual impairments, they learn best when lessons are relevant, engaging, hands on, and experiential. This is extremely difficult in pandemic at home learning. I know that when I was preparing my classroom for our 2 week, with my air quotes, shutdown, I was scrambling. I was piling as many hands on manipulatives and resources as I could onto student desks to take home. Because while they were saying, oh, it's just 2 weeks, we'll be back after spring break, I was not buying into that idea that it was only going to be 2 weeks. I had a gut feeling it was going to be quite a bit longer. Many teachers in our school tackled the shutdown by creating hands on activities, brailing books, and mailing things home weekly to students. I have 2 young children who were learning at home at the time. I did not have the time to devote to the material production that my coworkers were doing. I also love and understand the value of technology for our students. So, therefore, I decided to create a full Google Classroom. Many of the teachers in the spring did use Google Classroom, but not to its full extent. I was 100% full Google Classroom teacher. At OSSB, we use Google Classroom for our learning management system because at the time that we implemented all of this, it was the most accessible for our students and our network needs. There are other accessible platforms you can use, such as Apple Classroom. Schoology is mostly accessible, as well as Canvas. During the school shutdown, Freedom Scientific offered free licensing of JAWS, Zoom Text, and Fusion during that time. So I made sure my families had the links to these for their home desktops. While every student did get their own iPad, some of my families still opted to use their own home computers because it was what they were used to. Students would then use these resources or their own personal school iPads to access our virtual classroom. I was able to create and add reading materials and I was able to create and add reading materials in print, braille, and audio to individual assignments and activities. I also attached descriptive videos for each lesson. The parents found this to be particularly helpful in the area of math. Lastly, I would create activities for students to recreate at home using supplies that might be readily available to them in their pantries, kitchen cupboards, junk drawers, things like that. Teaching virtually is extremely hard. Burnout was real. It was real for students, educators, and the families. Internet would go up and down. Students just wouldn't show up. My daughter would have a come apart in the background. This wasn't a smooth process, but it was and continues to be a learning and evolving process for all of us. I really believe that the connection I made with my families made the entire thing easier. Overall, it shows that virtual learning can be done with our population, whereas before, I think many people would have shut the door to that idea. The biggest key, however, to the entire success of a virtual or hybrid learning environment is time. For the technology to work, there has to be time given for the instruction, practice, and development of the skills. Sometimes this means putting academics on hold in order to introduce and teach these skills. Those skills can then be integrated back into academic learning for their practice and development. This is true for all students. However, students with visual impairments will need more time to do this. Mapping your instruction on how you're going to teach technology and then integrate it for practice can be very helpful. Another thing we need to know is that students need to be forced to use the technology. It is incredibly easy and faster to open a document, read something out loud, or just open the web page and log in. I'm guilty of this too. I'm constantly working on forcing my students to do it themselves still. However, when we do these things for them, we are continuing to enable dependence in our students. Helping students organize themselves in order to use technology is also very important. One of my first technology assignments for the students was to organize the home screen of their iPad. Their home screen was to have 4 apps. They were supposed to have Zoom, Google Classroom, Google Meet, and Google Drive. I did not want them sorting through 30 different apps to find what they needed every single time they opened it. I did a descriptive video on how to do this with and without voiceover. The students then had to send me a video showing they were able to do this independently, making both themselves and their parents accountable for their learning. My first 5 technology lessons were this way. I provided a descriptive video, and the students then had to submit a video of them completing the task independently. I want to show you a sample math video that I recorded and posted within an assignment so that you can get a feel for how video lessons worked in my classroom. This video was posted later in the fall of this school year, so the students already had these routines down of Ms. McCumber is going to teach, so I need my braille and paper ready. I need my dry erase board and my marker ready so that they can work along with me. So I'm going to go ahead and share this video. All right, ladies and gents, this is the video finishing up our lesson on partial quotients. And if you're paying very close attention, you will see that this problem is one of your homework problems. It's one of your homework problems. All right, so you should follow along with me on the problem that you have. Now, if you did not take your homework home on paper, you'll probably have to write this down and then transfer it onto the computer, or keep it with you in some way. Excuse me. So here's what we're going to do. Partial quotients for the problem: 258 divided by 6, 258 divided by 6, 258 divided by 6. All right. So what we're going to do first again is we're going to break our dividend out. That's our bigger number. We're going to break it out into expanded form. So I'm going to make 258. I'm going to make it 200 plus 50 plus 8. Okay. So our next step is expanded form. 200 plus 50 plus 8. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take each part of that dividend and we're going to divide it by our divisor. Our divisor is 6 in this problem. So we're going to start with our 200. And this is where we set up our long division, right? 200 under the funky division symbol divided by 6. Now, 2 is too small by itself. I cannot take 6 out of 2. There's not enough. So I'm going to bring this 0 in from my tens place, right? So I'm going to do 20 divided by 6. Now, 20 is not a multiple of 6, but I can take groups of 6 out of 20. I can take 3 groups out of it. So I'm going to put 3 in the tens place of my quotient. So it goes above the 0 in the tens place of my quotient. And then I'm going to multiply 3 times 6. So 3 times 6, which is 18. I'm going to write that 18 below the 20. All right. And then I'm going to subtract 20 minus 18, which is 2. All right. I got a number less than 6. That's how I know I'm good. Okay. So now. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that because nothing kills a conference more than doing long division. So as you could see, so I talked very deliberately in my videos. That was one of the things I made sure to do. I repeated myself several times in my videos, and whenever I'm doing math, I break my bigger numbers down into individual digits with their operations so that students are able to understand and hear correctly what the actual number is that I'm saying. My students are very used to this process as well. It's something I do all the time, and they are used to it. They understand the process. Then after every step, I not only showed my board for my students with some functional vision, you will notice I took a small pause each time. This is for students to have time not to write in case they're behind, but it's just a pause so they can compartmentalize the information that they're getting in. It's a way to teach so that it's not all running together in one fluid stream. We're doing this and then doing this and doing this. It breaks it apart in the individual pieces for them. For my students with ADHD, that's particularly helpful. So in my virtual classroom, you would see a lesson very familiar to something along those lines. So I want to talk a little bit about my virtual classroom. It looked very different in the spring than it did in the fall. My virtual classroom in the spring, while I was jumping 2 feet into the lake with everything I had, it was thrown together. It was thrown together. I'll say that. So in the spring, I assigned work from all my content. I'm a 5th grade teacher, so I teach all content: reading, writing, math, science, social studies, along with TVI skills, Braille, expanded core curriculum, all that fun stuff. I have to teach it all. So I assigned work, and students were expected to do this work individually. You might be saying, why did you do that? Because I was figuring it out as I went along. So this was the setup I did. I also had several families whose parents worked funky shifts. One mother was a night shift nurse while dad worked first shift. I had another father stepmother combo. Dad was an EMT firefighter who was working double shifts a lot, and mom was an ER nurse who was working 12 and 14-hour shifts a week. And so I had a lot of responsibility had to be put on some of our kids to get their own work done. I set up 30-minute time blocks with each student every day. And then I had office hours for the first and the last hour of the school day where students could come on and get additional help on assignments, work together on things if they wanted to, things like that. Students were only expected to be online with me for their 30-minute time block. This worked okay. It was okay. I was constantly exhausted. My body was sore, and I constantly felt behind in all areas of my life doing it this way. I did not build any time for me during the day. I was so focused on my students and getting them what they needed. I did not address my own needs as a teacher. After a couple weeks, I really saw the detriment in this plan, and I made Monday a work day for all of us so that I could have more time to prep, grade things that were coming in, and complete all the paperwork that comes along with being a teacher intervention specialist TBI. The strongest feedback I received from parents in the spring was about focusing on technology instruction for the students and remaining flexible with them, which I'll get into a little bit later. So this fall, our school year started remote. We came back as a hybrid model. So 4 days a week with an hour cut out of our school day every day of those 4 days. Friday was an asynchronous learning day. So this fall, when school started in September as remote, I had set up class times where we would meet as a group. I could do morning meeting, I could do whole group lessons, I did read alouds. We didn't start until 8:30. On a typical school day, we wouldn't start until 8:25 anyway due to students eating breakfast, and I have a student that comes in on a late bus. So I kept this structure the same. They were given morning work that was assigned at 8 o'clock. You can schedule assignments in Google Classroom. I assigned it 8 o'clock in the morning until I realized that two of my students would actually wake up earlier and do them earlier. And then I actually started scheduling it at 7 in the morning. So and that's not a lie. I had two students. Dan's over here laughing like he doesn't believe me. I had two students who would get up and start working at 7 a.m. in the morning because they figured out if they got all their work done by 11, they could be done for the day.
That's my son.
Yeah. So, and that is also my son. So, I would schedule assignments starting at 7 a.m. in the morning. 8:25, we'd come on, we'd have morning meeting, we'd go over our schedule for the day, and we would get rolling. Throughout our school day, our remote learning school day, I still scheduled individual instruction for reading, Braille, and intervention with students. The other times that I was not meeting with students one-on-one, the other students in the class were doing independent work. Now, they were able to go into a separate room and work together on things if they wanted to. I had a student teacher at the time. She would pull kids and work on some other things if they were behind in something. And it worked out it worked much better in the fall than it did in the spring. However, I took a lot of time over the summer thinking and planning about how it could be better. I gave the kids an extended break for lunch where I told them to get away from their screens and be active in some way. And before they left, we would talk a little bit about what's something you could do right now. And one student would be like, well, I could go outside. I could read my bike. One of my other students would be like, I could play my DS. And I'm like, no, that's a screen. So we would talk about that. I also have 4 students with ADHD in my classroom. I had to make sure that instruction was constantly moving and transitioning, and that they were not being expected to sit for prolonged periods of time staring at a computer screen. It's just not going to work for them. We also braked at the same time we would pack up to leave for the day, which was about 15 minutes earlier than the end of the school day. When we went back to school, I kept basically the same schedule, still had individual instruction paired with independent work and whole group instruction. I also have been able to build in other breaks in order to get outside because we really were not getting out of the classroom except for gym. We eat breakfast and lunch in the classroom. We have a scheduled time on the playground for our recess and cannot go to the playground outside of that time. So I was finding ways just to get outside and away from our shielded desks throughout the day. So at this time, we are still hybrid. We will be for the rest of the school year. The students prefer to have paper copies of their work. However, everything is always available online as well. This is helpful for a couple reasons. My one student in particular cannot come to me and say, "Oh, I forgot my homework. I can't work on it." Well, now you can. It's right here in the Google Classroom. Also, the parents are able to keep up better on what assignments they have due. The parents are able to still watch those instructional videos, and the students can go back and watch my lessons as well because I record them and attach them to the assignment within the classroom. Even though I'm teaching it live in person, I record myself, attach it to the lesson, so students can go back now and watch it again if they need to. Next year, I plan to continue having a heavy technology integration within my classroom by utilizing a flipped classroom model for at least 2 subjects. A flipped classroom takes the lecture whole group teaching portion and has that as homework the night before. The next day, the students come in having watched the whole group lesson, reading whatever the resources were, and then a mini lesson is done reviewing the topic, but the bulk of the time is spent doing the application of what they are learning. So for example, in terms of a science lesson, the students would do any reading and watching of videos related to whatever topic we're discussing the night before. And the next day when they came into class, we can spend all of that time doing experiments or any work that might have been traditionally assigned as homework in the past. I want to do this because this puts the teacher in a role to be able to help the students during the time that they are doing the actual work for the bulk of the time. It also gives me as a teacher an ability to work through confusion or problems. The students can come in and go, "I have really no idea what is going on right now." But they already know they don't know. I'm not spending a whole class period lecturing for at the last 15 minutes them to go, "I really don't know what's going on right now." And the last bit is it takes some of the burden off the families to help with topics with which they may not be very comfortable doing. So Dan talked a little bit about empowerment in our students, and I think that's been the biggest takeaway for them. Many of my students already, my students are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, they come to me with a defeatist attitude. I can't do that. Somewhere along the way, someone has told them, they have learned for themselves, they can't do it. And forcing technology uses has shown them that, yes, they can do it. And not only can they do it, they're loving it. And they're doing more than they ever were previously. They are now starting to see that, oh, I could be a computer programmer, which is a very cool thing for our students to be saying. You know, the last thing I want to touch on before wrapping up is the importance of showing our families grace while doing this model of remote and hybrid learning. We as educators cannot control what happens outside of the walls of our classroom. We do need to have accountability. However, we also need to understand the unique needs of each of our families. Some families had no problems. They needed a minimal level of support. They did anything and everything I asked them to do. Other families had all the problems. They needed a maximum level of support. And for some of these families, I had to prioritize and organize for them in order for their students to find some success. This is in knowing your individual students and knowing your students' families and what the need is. So in wrapping up, virtual learning, it's very hard, but it can be done. It can be very beneficial to our students. Our students need instruction, time, and practice in order to develop their technology skills. And families also need that instruction, and they need to be shown grace and understanding.
Yeah, so virtual learning can be done. It is tough. It is a struggle. You go way beyond, uh, what you normally do in person. But we found out that it can be done, and there were a lot of disbelievers around the country. There was a lot of advocacy groups for people with disabilities asking the questions: What are you doing
Mm.
for our youngins, our children, to help them learn? And we have shown that it can be done, and we've shown that this will change the face of education and delivery of content and the way we do things for forever.
And I don't think people should be afraid of that thought. I think people are afraid, like, of that change. I think, in my opinion, like, I've heard people say, oh, this is going to change the way we do education, but it's not said in a positive way. It's almost said in, like, oh, kind of that, like,
Mhm.
it feels heavy kind of way. But I think throwing us all into this sea, first of all, was the best way to do it because it forced everyone. But I do think, there's some really, really great benefits.
One of the hardest things that I have had to teach kids who are totally blind is using the internet,
Mm.
because the internet is so busy. There's so many things on the internet that is, you got, your navigation region, you've got all your things that are at the top of every page. You got your main region, then you got your footer. There's just a whole bunch of stuff you got to sift through to find the important things that you need to find. And what I liked about this is, Google Classroom is a pretty stable environment to get online with. Um, I like it better than some of the training modules that I've seen from some of the screen reader manufacturers that are out there. But it's a stable model. It gives them confidence, and you can branch out from that. It lays a good foundation. It's something that you can build on. It's something where you can start introducing the element of, man, it's a lot quicker to find a heading than it is to scroll left and right until you get to the top or you get to where you need to be, right? So, I'm really thankful for that. And I think it really helps with, it's helped with kids developing a mental map of their online environment. And that's going to transfer, to the World Wide Web, into research, into independent living skills for,
Mhm.
shopping, online shopping. I mean, gosh, think about it, man. All the online shopping that we've had to do,
Yeah.
since March. I
Yeah.
love it, actually, but I don't have to go to a store. But these are very tangible skills that we have come away with from this.
Very transferable. Absolutely.
So, do you have any questions for me,
No,
Miss Panelist?
I was, well, the only question, what are your favorite apps for teaching technology?
It depends on what age the kid is and where they are. With the younger kids, I really love some of the blindfold games that are out there, because I'm trying to get kids to use the gestures of swiping and tapping, and with my kindergarten students, we're using I'm blanking out, the blindfold magic. It's got all the characters where they do the magic show, and so they have to swipe left and right or up and down. They have to single tap, double tap. There's a song in there that gradually gets them to speed up their double tap. So things like that. In my middle school and older kids, I love using an app like Seeing AI that gives you, like, well, you can take a picture of somebody and it'll tell you what it thinks how old they are. you know, and kids love doing that, man. They'll go down and take a picture of their, like, I asked their teacher, I'm like, ask them first, take a picture of their teacher, and it'll say, give you a description of what they are. Take a picture of the room. It'll do a scene preview. Take a picture of a barcode, scan the barcode. It'll tell you, if it's a Coke or a Pepsi or whatever. So it's things like that. I'm a big audio kind of guy. I love doing audio in the classroom. So when we can work with sound, like voice memos or an app like Hokusai, and be able to do some of these concepts that you would do in productivity with text, like cut, copy, paste, highlighting and inserting and things like that. I love doing things like that. It really gets kids on board. It gets them used to, navigating around on the screen. It gets them used to the concepts of, hey, like on an iOS device, generally with an app, when you open it up, at the bottom, there's 3 or 4 or 5 tabs. And when you tap one of those, it's going to change what happens at the top of the screen. So it reinforces that kind of stuff. Kids that love to read, we love Bard. We love
Yes.
the Easy Reader from Dolphin. Those are great things to get them going with, listening to stuff or using their Braille display and reading Braille. My proponent about technology is always to reinforce literacy. So if you're reading print, that you have the size screen that you need, and you have the ability to adjust your font, your contrast, and your foreground and background the way you want to, your magnification. And if you're using Braille, that you have the ability, if you're using an electronic device, to have a Braille display, be able to connect to that device, and you have it right there in Braille. So I have fun doing the things I do every day. I mean, there's a certain level of frustration with virtual that I ran into with not having feedback from their voiceover or whatever. My workaround to that was, okay, let's get you another device. So you can use one device for Zoom and one device just as strictly as to access your content. And sometimes that might have been their own personal device, or sometimes I'd have to send another device. With some of my students who are deaf and have low vision, we would send them 2 iPads, and we would connect the one iPad to, let's say a 24-inch or 27-inch or bigger monitor, depending on what they needed. So the interpreter would be on the monitor, and then they would have their iPad Pro to do their content with. So there's always a solution. You just have to make the investment, and you have to constantly be willing to think and problem solve and brainstorm and put anything out there. This may work, it may not work, and get your folks to say, okay, we're going to buy into these resources and we're going to give it a try. A lot of schools can't do that. We're very fortunate that we can.
Yes.
So what I tell people around the state is, if we have a lending library where people can get devices to try, where they can do assessments. And, the main thing is, like, what's going to work for this kid? Is a Chromebook going to work? Is an iPad going to work? Is a Braille note going to work, or a Polaris or whatever? So you go to the library and you get these devices and you try them, and you see what the needs are, and you see what kind of learner they are, and you try to match the kid up the best you can with the device that's going to work best for them.
Yeah, I had to get my phone to take notes, because you said you touched on a couple things that I was like, oh, I want to talk about that more. Oh, I want to talk about that more. So I had to grab my phone so I could take notes. So one of the things about taking pictures of other people, right, and asking their permission, that relates directly to digital citizenship.
That's right. Absolutely.
And before, I would say, we, outside of a technology classroom or outside of research instruction, using technology to research, there was very little instruction or focus on digital citizenship.
Right.
And so now, with the influx of technology that we have, we're kind of immersed also in digital citizenship, which is huge for all users of digital technology, I would say now. So that's another benefit.
And the other side of that too is, you can, to be a good citizen, you want to cut down on your noise pollution. I know in my classrooms a lot where people were using multiple devices, you know, we would we would talk about, that screen reader is being disruptive. It's what you use
Hmm.
to for what you need, but it's very loud and it's very disruptive. So you have to find some earbuds. You have to turn that down. You have to, it's about respecting other space and boundaries and what they can tolerate and so on and so forth.
Well, and building empathy also
Building empathy.
for those around you, not just, being considerate of those around you. Um, and
But trying to see another's perspective.
absolutely advocating for your own needs while still respecting the people around you, because you absolutely have a right to advocate that I need this screen reader. However, your right to have a screen reader doesn't step on somebody else's right to use a computer. If you're at a public library, for instance, it doesn't step on somebody else's right to try to use a computer quietly. Excuse me. Something else you talked about was um, building literacy in with technology, which I'm 1,030,000%
Absolutely.
on your side with that. I think anything we should be doing should be building literacy in our students. And I love that we have now given our students an a device. Every one of them has their own individual device in order to make their literacy accessible to them in the way that they need it as soon as they need it. Before, I don't know, I feel inclined to say that I would have said I didn't have time to do this in my class, whereas that's probably an excuse, I would just say, or I wasn't thinking hard enough about it, but, we spent a whole class period once on how to make our iPads into magnification devices. One of my students got a book from the library because he really wanted to read it, but it was in regular print.
Right.
And so we took a whole class period, and all my low vision kids did it. This is how you use your iPad as a magnification device, and you can use it to read this book. Look, you can use it to read the labels on. I had a random box of beans in my classroom because
Beans.
I have lots. I did a whole sensory thing for Halloween that was really fun, but I have a lot of very random things in my classroom
Second
now.
things over here like Slim Jims and Three Musketeers and things like that. Beans.
Yeah,
Right.
beans, right. So yeah, but they could read the label on it then, and
Yep. And,
they didn't know that. And
and
it blew their minds. And all of a sudden they're going around the classroom seeing what they can read
right. And the
with their
same thing with
iPads.
seeing AI. And it's not the total answer, right? It's
Absolutely.
not the total answer because when you think about reading Braille,
Mhm.
Just reading text is one thing. When you're using a Braille display, you're seeing it one line at a time.
Mhm.
So there's other components like you got to know how a paragraph begins and what a heading looks like and
Right.
tactile graphics and things like that a Braille display cannot show you
Mhm.
unless you have one of the new the 9-line displays that I'm getting soon. But anyway, it's a balance. And when I try to explain to kids, it's like, you have a balance of tools and you use a different tool to meet a different need depending on what that is.
Mhm.
But reading text, the biggest thing that I find with kids is they hate reading out loud.
Mhm.
They feel like they stumble. They're being judged. They're having a hard time with it. But it's like the Braille displays. It gives you that opportunity to have ready-made material in Braille where
Mhm.
you can read.
Yeah.
And you can do that. So, and we make up all kinds of games to get people to present on different kinds of things. How would you describe how an orange feels?
Mhm.
That kind of thing. You write it out, and then we're gonna talk about
Yeah.
just simple things like that. This technology is able to deliver that opportunity for us.
Yeah. And I don't think I talked about this at all, and I should have. It was having a note taker for my students was invaluable for a virtual classroom, because even if they weren't navigating the classroom with their display, they were able to say they could go into the classroom, they could download a file onto the USB drive, plug the USB drive into their note taker, and then do an assignment, read an assignment, do an assignment that way. It's clunky and cumbersome, but they were still able to access it that way.
Yeah, we had to do math like that. You
Mhm.
know, the math teacher would send, BRF files of the worksheets home
Yeah.
by email, and then the students would have to download them to a USB drive. So you had to get a Lightning to USB A adapter so you could plug your flash drive into your iPad. Then you take your flash drive and you put it in your Chameleon,
Mhm.
and you copy. You work on the file, you save it, and then you use your iPad to upload it back there. So there's a
Mhm.
lot going on. So with the Braille Note Touch Plus, I mean, they were, they had it golden. They could do it.
Mhm.
But so there was a lot of critical thinking and a lot of
And that goes back to what I
figuring it out.
talked about with the steps, like intentional teaching of the technology, not just handing a student a device and going, okay, you have your device, let's get learning. There has to be intentional teaching and practice. Because that's a ton of steps
It is.
to get into my email, choose the file, download it to the correct place. Oh, shoot, it didn't download to the correct place sometimes,
Mhm.
So it's critical thinking and problem solving, but you really do need that intentional teaching in order to get to that point.
So my latest brainstorm is how can you make a game out of all this, and
Mhm.
like combine all these steps of problem solving and critical thinking to complete an assignment into a game, because kids always buy into games. A lot of kids do anyway.
Mhm.
So anybody listening, you know,
Just make it a game.
let's make a game. Right.
Something else I do too is we do a lot of collaborative working in my classroom. I highly encourage students to work together. In fact, when they have a problem with something, their first instinct is to go, Ms. McCumber, how do I? And I always stop them and I go, have you asked two friends? Go ask two friends. And they have to ask two people. If three people in my entire class don't know how to do it, then we need to stop and talk about it,
You
because
failed.
I did not fail.
Just
First
kidding.
attempt in learning. That's what fail means.
Okay.
But that's a good
No,
feedback for me as a
right.
teacher. Here, I gave this to you. I thought you could do it.
Right.
Uh-oh, three of you can't. Okay, we need to stop and we need to do this again. So that's, for me as a teacher, that's invaluable feedback. I thought you could do it. Oh, you can't. So we need to spend more time on this.
Yeah. So, it was a year of a tremendous journey and a lot of adventure. And I think if you put things in the right perspective, there's a lot more takeaways than there are drawbacks from what we've been through. It's just, looking at it in the right way, because it's very easy to say, gosh, I was trapped in my house for 9 months. And
It is
you know,
very easy to focus on the negative
very easy to do that.
and the hardness of it all.
But yeah, but I think that as a school, as a nation, or as a community of folks, that we've had to deal with things in brand new ways. And we can choose to grow from it or hide from it, and I choose to grow from it, and help me be a better teacher. So I won't say I'm glad of the opportunity in itself, but I'm glad it was there, and I had that opportunity to think in this different direction, because I think it changes all of us as teachers about how we're going to do things from here on out. And I do want to say thank you to everybody who has attended the symposium and watched our session today. I really appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully we have said some things that are helpful to you and what you're doing, whether it's a TVI or rehab or O&M, whatever field that you're in. And man, I just love teaching and talking to folks down in Alabama. It just takes me back. So thank you so very much.
You can email Dan Kelly at dkelley@osb.oh.gov or Marie McCumber at mccumbr HANUMBER@osb.oh.gov, or check her out on Twitter with the handle @HANNAHNIA. Check out our vendor exhibition at altechsymposium.net/vendors and click on the Zoom link to join them live. CEU close code 43367. CEU close code 43367. CEU close code 43367.